The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before Christmas. I answered expecting my mom's usual small talk about the weather or her book club. Instead, her voice was cold as ice. "Delilah, we need to tell you something. Don't come home for Christmas this year. Brandon and Courtney are hosting, and they've made it very clear you're not welcome." Before I could respond, my father got on the line. "If you show up anyway, we'll pretend we don't know you." In the background, I heard my brother Brandon laughing. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, heart pounding in disbelief. I'm 32 years old. I've been teaching 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary in Portland, Oregon for the past 8 years. My students call me Miss Delilah, and I love every chaotic, crayon-covered minute of my job. Teaching doesn't pay much, but I've always made it work. I live in a modest, 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, drive a 10-year-old Honda, and pack my lunch 4 days a week to save money. For the past 4 years, I've been sending my parents $500 every single month. My father, Frank, ran a small construction business that took a hit during the economic downturn. They were struggling to keep up with their mortgage on the house in Eugene, about 3 hours south of Portland. My mother, Carol, worked part-time at a gift shop, but it barely covered groceries. When Dad called me 4 years ago, voice shaking with stress, asking if I could help just until things turned around, I didn't hesitate. I said yes immediately. I never asked Brandon to chip in, even though my older brother earns double what I make as a real estate agent. He married Courtney 2 years ago in an expensive wedding at a vineyard that I helped pay for by contributing $2,000 as a family gift. Courtney worked as a receptionist at a dental office, but she spent money like she had a trust fund. Designer purses, weekly nail appointments, constant shopping trips that she posted about on social media. Last Thanksgiving, I drove down to Eugene for dinner. Everything seemed normal at first. Mom made her usual dry turkey and lumpy mashed potatoes. Dad told the same stories about his construction projects, but Courtney kept making these little comments throughout the meal. "Must be nice to have so much free time as a teacher," she said while examining her acrylic nails. "All those vacations and summers off. Must be why you're still single. Too much time to be picky." I smiled and changed the subject. Later, when I was helping wash dishes, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "You know, Delilah, you're 32. Most women your age are married with kids. Maybe you're too focused on your career. That's probably why you seem so lonely." I bit my tongue because I didn't want to cause drama. I just wanted a peaceful holiday with my family. I dried the dishes, hugged everyone goodbye, and drove back to Portland, telling myself it didn't matter. But after that phone call on Tuesday evening, I couldn't stop shaking. I sat down on my couch and called my best friend Tracy. She's been my friend since college, the kind of person who tells you the truth even when it hurts. I told her everything my parents had said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Tracy said quietly, "Delilah, I need to tell you something. I was waiting for the right time, but I guess this is it." My stomach dropped. Tracy explained that her cousin Amanda works at the same real estate office as Brandon. About 2 weeks ago, Amanda overheard Brandon and Courtney in the break room talking about Thanksgiving. Brandon was telling their co-workers that I had insulted Courtney, that I'd called her trashy and a gold digger right in front of the whole family. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "Tracy, I never said anything like that. I barely spoke to Courtney at Thanksgiving except when she was making comments about me being single." Tracy believed me immediately. She said Amanda had thought it sounded strange because I'd never seemed like that kind of person. But Brandon had been telling this story to everyone. Family members, friends, co-workers. He said I was jealous of his marriage and his success, that I'd always been bitter and competitive. I hung up the phone and just sat there in the dark. My own brother had been lying about me for weeks, maybe months. He'd poisoned my entire family against me, with complete fabrications. And they believed him. My parents, who I'd been supporting financially for 4 years, believed I would say cruel things to my sister-in-law without even asking for my side of the story. They just accepted Brandon's lies as truth and told me to stay away from Christmas. The next morning, I called my mother before school. My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice flat and unwelcoming. "What is it, Delilah?" "I'm busy." I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I need you to listen to me. I never said those things about Courtney. I don't know what Brandon told you, but it's not true. I would never insult anyone like that." She cut me off immediately. Courtney wouldn't lie about something like this. She was very upset. She cried to Brandon for hours after Thanksgiving. "You really hurt her, Delilah." I tried again. "But Mom, I didn't say anything. Can we please just talk about this? Can I explain what actually happened?" My mother's voice turned cold. "You know what I think? I think you're jealous. Your brother has a beautiful wife and a successful career, and you're still alone at 32. Maybe that's why you lashed out at Courtney. You need to take responsibility for your actions instead of making excuses." I felt tears burning in my eyes. "Mom, please? I'm telling you the truth." She sighed heavily, like I was exhausting her. "I don't want to discuss this anymore. Brandon and Courtney are hosting Christmas, and that's final. You're not invited. Maybe next year you can apologize properly, and we can move past this." She hung up before I could respond. I tried calling my father 3 times that day. He didn't answer. I left voicemails asking him to please call me back, that there had been a terrible misunderstanding. He never returned my calls. That Saturday, I woke up and made a decision. I couldn't let this continue. I got in my car and drove the 3 hours to Eugene. The whole drive, I rehearsed what I would say. I would explain calmly and clearly that Brandon had lied. I would ask them to please just listen with open minds. I would remind them that I'd been helping them financially for years, and that I loved them. Surely they would listen if I showed up in person. I pulled up to their house around 2 in the afternoon. Brandon's silver pickup truck was parked in the driveway next to my parents' sedan. My heart sank, but I got out of the car anyway. I walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could see movement inside. I heard voices and footsteps. My mother opened the door about 6 inches, not enough for me to enter. Her face was blank. No warmth in her eyes. "Delilah, what are you doing here?" Behind her, I could see into the dining room. Brandon sat at the table with Courtney on one side and my father on the other. They all had coffee mugs in front of them. They were literally looking directly at me through the doorway. "Mom, I drove down because I need to talk to all of you. Can I please come in?" She shook her head slightly. "We have company right now. This isn't a good time." I stared at her in disbelief. "Company? Mom, that's Brandon and Courtney and Dad. That's our family. I'm your daughter. Please let me in so we can talk about this." My mother glanced back into the house, then looked at me again. Her expression was cold and closed off, like I was a stranger trying to sell her something she didn't want. "We're in the middle of something. You need to leave, Delilah." Through the window, I watched my father take a sip of his coffee, not even looking in my direction. Brandon said something I couldn't hear, and Courtney laughed. They were all just sitting there, pretending I didn't exist while I stood on the porch begging to be let inside. "Mom, please," I whispered. She started closing the door. "Goodbye, Delilah." The door clicked shut. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the wreath hanging on the door decorated with red berries and pine cones. Through the window, I could see them all still sitting at the table, talking and laughing like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just driven 3 hours to try to fix a problem I didn't even create. I walked back to my car with tears streaming down my face. I sat in the driver's seat and cried for 20 minutes before I could pull myself together enough to drive. The whole way back to Portland, I kept thinking about how they'd looked at me through that window, how they'd all seen me standing there and chosen to ignore me. My own family had looked directly at me and pretended I didn't exist. 2 days later, I was making breakfast before work when I checked my bank account on my phone. I always kept track of my finances carefully, because I didn't have much cushion. My checking account balance should have been around $3,200. Instead, it showed $873. My stomach dropped. I logged into my account on my laptop and checked my transaction history. There were 3 unauthorized transfers to my parents' account, $1,200 each. The transfers had gone through on 3 different days over the past week and a half. Someone had changed my automatic monthly transfer from $500 to $1,200 and had initiated extra transfers on top of that. $3,600 total had been taken from my account. I called my bank immediately. The representative put me on hold while she investigated. When she came back, her voice was careful and professional. "Miss Harper, these transfers were initiated using your online banking login. The IP address traces back to an internet service provider in Eugene, Oregon. Do you know anyone in that area who might have access to your login information?" I felt sick. My parents lived in Eugene. Last Christmas, I'd used their computer to check my bank account because my phone had died. I must have left my password saved in their browser, or maybe they'd watched me type it in. "Yes," I said quietly. "I know who it was." The representative explained I could file a dispute, but because I'd been sending money voluntarily for years, it would be difficult to prove these particular transfers were unauthorized. She suggested I file a police report. I changed all my passwords immediately. Then I canceled the automatic transfer to my parents' account. My hands were shaking with anger and betrayal. My family wasn't just rejecting me emotionally, they were literally stealing from me. I filed a police report that afternoon. The detective who took my statement was a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Detective Riley. She listened to everything and took notes, but I could tell from her expression that she didn't think much would come of it. "This is tricky," she said. "You've been sending them money voluntarily for years. Proving that these specific transfers were theft is going to be difficult. They could claim you authorized them, or that it was a mistake. Unless we can prove intentional fraud, the district attorney probably won't pursue charges." I felt defeated, but I thanked her anyway. At least there was a record now. At least I'd tried. I went home and drafted 2 certified letters. The first one was to my parents. I kept it brief and factual. I stated that $3,600 had been taken from my account without my permission, that I knew the transfers had come from their IP address, and that I expected full repayment within 30 days. I explained that I'd filed a police report and changed all my passwords. I ended by saying I was deeply hurt by their actions and their willingness to believe lies about me without hearing my side. The second letter was to Brandon and Courtney. I wrote that I knew Brandon had been telling people I'd insulted Courtney at Thanksgiving. I stated clearly that I had never said anything of the kind, and I asked Brandon to tell the truth and set the record straight with our parents and anyone else he'd told. I said I deserved at least that much honesty and respect as his sister. I sent both letters certified mail, so they'd have to sign for them. Then I waited. Days passed. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with Tracy and her family. They were kind and welcoming, but I felt hollow inside. I kept checking my phone, hoping my parents would call to apologize, or at least to talk. The phone never rang. Christmas approached. I watched my neighbors decorate their houses with lights and wreaths. I saw families at the grocery store buying ingredients for holiday meals. I heard Christmas music everywhere I went. Each reminder felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I bought a small artificial tree for my apartment, but I couldn't bring myself to decorate it. It sat in the corner of my living room, bare and sad. On Christmas Eve, I worked late at school, organizing my classroom for the new year. When I got home, my apartment was dark and cold. I turned on the lights and looked around at my quiet, empty space. I ordered Chinese takeout because I couldn't face cooking. I ate fried rice on my couch while watching a movie I'd seen a dozen times before. My phone sat silent on the coffee table. Christmas Day was worse. I woke up late and stayed in my pajamas all day. Tracy had invited me to her family's celebration, but I'd declined. I didn't want to be a burden. Didn't want to bring my sadness into their happy holiday. I tried to distract myself with television and books, but nothing helped. Every channel showed families gathered together, opening presents, laughing over dinner. I kept thinking about my parents' house in Eugene. I pictured Brandon and Courtney there with Mom and Dad, probably sitting around that same dining room table where they'd ignored me through the window. Were they talking about me? Were they relieved I wasn't there? Did they feel any guilt at all? That night, I cried myself to sleep. I kept replaying my mother's cold voice on the phone, my father's refusal to even look at me on the porch, Brandon's laugh in the background. I'd spent 4 years supporting my parents financially, sacrificing vacations and a nicer apartment so I could help them. I'd always been there when they needed me, and when I needed them to simply listen and believe me, they'd chosen Brandon's lies instead. They'd chosen to cut me out completely. The week between Christmas and New Year's was a blur. I went through the motions at work, preparing for the students to return from winter break. I smiled at my colleagues and said, my holiday had been fine. I threw myself into lesson planning and classroom organization because work was the only thing that made sense anymore. At least my students valued me. At least in my classroom, I mattered. On New Year's Day, I woke up to a notification on my phone. I had a friend request on social media from someone named Margaret Sutton. I almost ignored it because I didn't recognize the name, but something made me click on the profile. The picture showed an older woman, probably in her mid-70s, with short silver hair and kind eyes. She was standing in a garden, smiling at the camera. There was something familiar about her face, though I couldn't place it. I accepted the request. Within minutes, a message appeared. Dear Delilah, my name is Margaret Sutton. I'm your grandmother Helen's sister, which makes me your great aunt. I realize we've never met, and this must seem very strange. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks now, but I've been having difficulty. Your grandmother passed away 3 months ago, and I'm the executor of her estate. You are specifically named in her will. I need to speak with you urgently. Please call me at this number as soon as possible. With warm regards, Margaret. I read the message 3 times, my heart pounding. Grandmother Helen, my father's aunt. I knew almost nothing about her, except that she and my father had been estranged for as long as I could remember. I'd asked about her once when I was a teenager, and my father had shut down the conversation immediately. He said she was a difficult woman who'd turned her back on the family, and we didn't talk about her. I'd never met her, never seen a photo of her, never heard her mentioned again, and now she was dead, and I was in her will. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number Margaret had included in her message. She answered on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was warm and gentle, with a slight rasp that suggested age. Is this Margaret? This is Delilah Harper. I just got your message. Oh, Delilah. She sounded relieved. Thank you so much for calling. I've been so worried about reaching you. I tried calling your parents' house several times, but they told me they didn't know where you were. They said you'd moved away years ago, and they'd lost touch with you. I almost believed them, but something didn't sit right. So I did some digging on social media, and here you are, living in Portland all along. My hands tightened on the phone. Of course my parents had lied to her. Of course they'd tried to prevent her from reaching me. I'm here, I said. I've been here the whole time. My parents and I are not on good terms right now. Margaret made a sympathetic sound. I'm not surprised, dear. Helen and your father were estranged for 20 years. I'm sorry you're going through difficulties with them. Margaret asked if I could meet with her in Eugene the following week. She said there were papers I needed to sign and important information to discuss about Helen's estate. I agreed immediately and scheduled 2 personal days off from work. We set an appointment for the following Thursday at her attorney's office. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Helen, this grandmother I'd never known. Why had she included me in her will? We'd never even met, and why had she and my father been estranged for so long? I tried searching for information online, but I found almost nothing. Just a small obituary noting that Helen Wallace had passed away at age 87 after a brief illness. Services had been private. The week crawled by. Finally, Thursday arrived. I drove to Eugene, my stomach tight with anxiety and curiosity. Margaret's attorney's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. I parked on the street and walked up the steps to the front porch. Inside, a receptionist directed me to a conference room. Margaret was already there, sitting at a long wooden table. She stood when I entered, and I saw she was petite, maybe 5 feet tall, with that same warm smile from her profile picture. "Delilah," she said, coming around the table to hug me. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you." She smelled like lavender and vanilla. When she pulled back, she kept her hands on my arms, looking at me carefully. "You look just like Helen did at your age. Same eyes. Same expression. She would have been so proud to meet you." We sat down, and Margaret pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Let me tell you about your grandmother," she said. "Helen was my younger sister. She was brilliant, independent, and tough as nails. She never married, which was unusual for her generation, but she said she valued her freedom too much. She worked as a registered nurse for 40 years, mostly in the emergency room. She was good with money, never spent more than she earned, and she invested wisely." Margaret showed me a photograph. A woman in her 50s stood in front of a modest house, hands on her hips, looking confident and strong. This was Helen. In 1985, Margaret said. She just bought her first rental property. Over the next 20 years, she bought 2 more. She rented them out to good tenants and maintained them carefully. The properties appreciated significantly over the decades. I stared at the photo, trying to connect this confident woman with the empty space in my family history. Why was she estranged from my father? I asked quietly. Margaret's expression became sad. "Your father borrowed money from Helen several times when he was younger. Small amounts at first, which he never paid back. Then, larger amounts. Helen was generous at first, but your father never kept his promises to repay her. Eventually, he demanded a large sum to invest in his construction business. Helen refused. She'd learned by then that your father saw her only as a source of money, not as family. He became very angry. He said terrible things to her, accused her of being selfish and cold. After that, he cut off all contact. He kept your mother and Brandon away from Helen as well. Helen tried to reach out a few times over the years, but your father refused every attempt at reconciliation. I felt a familiar pain in my chest. That sounded exactly like the father I knew. Helen never stopped following your life, though," Margaret continued. "She found you on social media years ago. She saw your posts about teaching, your photos with your students, your volunteer work at the literacy program. She told me once that you seemed like a genuinely kind person, someone who cared about others. She said you reminded her of herself at your age." Margaret opened the folder and pulled out a document. "Delilah, your grandmother left you her entire estate." I blinked at her, not understanding. "What does that mean exactly?" Margaret smiled gently. "It means Helen's 3 rental properties, all paid off and currently generating income. The small house she lived in, also paid off. And her investment accounts, which she grew carefully over decades. The total estate is valued at approximately $1.7 million. The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the edge of the table. "I'm sorry, what?" Margaret nodded. $1.7 million. The properties alone are worth about $1 million. The house is worth around $400,000, and there's $300,000 in various investment accounts. It all goes to you." I couldn't breathe. "But I never even met her. Why would she leave everything to me?" Margaret's eyes were kind, because she saw in you what she valued most: integrity, kindness, independence. Helen specifically excluded your father and Brandon from her will. She left them nothing, not a single dollar. She pulled out another document and showed me. There, in clear legal language, was Helen's will. I skimmed through it until I found the section Margaret was pointing to my great-niece Delilah Harper, who chose compassion over greed. I leave my entire estate. May it give her the freedom to build the life she deserves, away from those who would exploit her generous nature. Further down, there was another paragraph. I specifically exclude my nephew Frank Wallace and his son Brandon Wallace from any inheritance. They have shown themselves to be motivated only by money and have no genuine love for family. I owe them nothing, and they deserve nothing from me. Tears blurred my vision. A woman I'd never met had seen me more clearly than my own parents ever had. The will has already been through probate, Margaret said. It's ironclad. However, I need to tell you something concerning. Your parents have been calling my office repeatedly. They claim there's been a mistake. They say you're mentally unstable and incapable of managing an inheritance. They've been trying to contest the will, arguing that Helen didn't know you and couldn't have meant to leave you everything. Anger flashed through me, sharp and hot. Of course they are. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Don't worry. Their arguments have no legal standing. Helen was completely sound of mind when she made this will. Her attorney documented everything carefully. But I need you to come back next week to sign the final paperwork. Once you do, the properties and accounts will transfer to your name. If you don't come within the next 2 weeks, your parents could potentially tie things up in court for months, maybe years. They have no case, but they could make it expensive and difficult. I looked at Margaret, at this stranger who was showing me more kindness than my own family ever had. I'll be here, I said firmly. Whatever I need to sign, I'll sign it. Margaret smiled with relief. Good. There's one more thing. She pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in elegant handwriting. Helen left this for you. She wrote it a week before she passed away. My hands shook as I took the envelope. I carefully opened it and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Dear Delilah, we never met, and that is one of my life's great regrets. I followed your journey from afar and saw in you a reflection of my younger self. You chose a profession of service, teaching children and shaping young minds. You gave generously to family members who did not deserve your sacrifice. You remained kind even when those around you were cruel. You remind me that goodness still exists in this world. I leave you my estate, not because of blood, but because you earned it through the content of your character. Use this gift to build the life you've always deserved. Never let anyone make you feel less than worthy. You are the only one who truly understood what family should mean. Choose people who choose you. Be free. Be happy. Be yourself. With love and admiration, Helen. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. They streamed down my face as I read the letter again and again. Margaret handed me a tissue and waited patiently while I composed myself. She saw you, Delilah, Margaret said softly. Really saw you. That's the greatest gift anyone can give. Over the next few days, my phone exploded with calls and messages. My mother called 4 times in one afternoon, leaving voicemails that started angry and became increasingly desperate. Delilah, we need to talk about Helen's will. There's been some kind of mistake. Call me back immediately. Then, sweetheart, I know we've had our misunderstandings, but we're family. We need to discuss this inheritance situation together. And finally, please, Delilah, just call me back. We love you so much. We've missed you terribly. My father sent text messages. This isn't right. That money should come to me. I'm Helen's nephew. We need to work this out as a family. Brandon sent a message too. We need to talk about Grandma Helen. This is family business. Don't do anything stupid. Even Courtney called, suddenly friendly and warm. Hi, Delilah. I was hoping we could get together for coffee. I feel terrible about our misunderstanding at Thanksgiving. Maybe we can clear the air and talk about everything that's been going on. I ignored every single message and call. I blocked their numbers and turned off notifications. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. The following Thursday, I drove back to Eugene. I dressed carefully that morning in a navy blue dress and professional blazer. I wanted to look capable and confident, not like the vulnerable person they'd tried to break. Margaret met me at the attorney's office again. This time, the attorney himself was there too, a distinguished man in his 60s named Mr. Patterson. He walked me through each document carefully, explaining what I was signing: transfer papers for the 3 rental properties, title to Helen's house, access to the investment accounts. Everything was thorough and legal and final. The properties are currently rented and managed by a property management company, Mr. Patterson explained. They generate approximately $6,000 per month in total rental income after expenses. You can choose to keep them as investments or sell them. The house Helen lived in is vacant and ready for you to do with as you wish. It's in excellent condition. After I signed everything, Margaret walked me out to the parking lot. How are you feeling? She asked. I took a deep breath of the cool December air, overwhelmed, grateful, a little scared, but mostly relieved. For the first time in years, I feel like I have options, like I'm not trapped anymore. Margaret hugged me. Helen would be so happy to know her gift gave you that feeling. That's exactly what she wanted. We said goodbye, and I walked to my car. As I approached it, I saw 3 people standing nearby. My stomach dropped. My parents and Brandon were waiting for me in the parking lot. My mother rushed forward the moment she saw me. Delilah, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. My father stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined. Brandon leaned against his truck with his arms crossed, Courtney beside him. We need to talk about this inheritance, my father said, skipping any pretense of warmth. This whole situation is ridiculous. Helen left that money to you to spite me, but it should come to me as her nephew. You need to do the right thing and share it with the family. My mother nodded eagerly. We're family, honey. Families share. We've always been there for you, and now it's time for you to be there for us. Something inside me snapped. 4 years of giving them money. 4 years of putting their needs before my own. 4 years of being taken for granted, and now they had the audacity to demand more. No, I said clearly. My mother blinked at me. What? No, I repeated. You told me not to come for Christmas. You said you'd pretend you didn't know me. You believed lies about me without even asking for my side of the story. You stole $3,600 from my bank account. You shut the door in my face when I drove here to try to talk to you. And now you want to talk about family? My father's face turned red. That money is rightfully mine. Helen was just a bitter old woman, trying to get back at me from beyond the grave. You're going to share that inheritance, Delilah, or we'll take you to court. Brandon pushed off from his truck and walked closer. He's right. That money should go to Dad. You're being selfish, keeping it all for yourself. What do you even need it for? You're just a teacher. I looked at each of them. My mother, who'd raised me but never really seen me. My father, who'd used me as a bank for years without gratitude. My brother, who'd lied about me and turned my parents against me. Grandma Helen knew exactly who you were, I said quietly but firmly. That's why she left you nothing. She saw through all of you. She knew you only cared about money, not family. And she was right. My mother's eyes filled with tears. How can you say that? We've always loved you. We've always been there for you. I almost laughed. You've been there for me? When? When you took my money for 4 years and never once said thank you? When you believed Brandon's lies without question? When you shut the door in my face? That's not love, Mom. That's not family. Brandon stepped forward aggressively. You think you're so much better than us now. You got lucky with some inheritance you didn't earn. You're going to share it, or I swear we'll make your life miserable. We'll sue you. We'll contest the will. We'll drag this through court for years. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Margaret appeared, walking quickly across the parking lot. With her was Mr. Patterson, the attorney. Margaret's face was calm, but stern. That's enough, she said firmly. Brandon looked at her with confusion. Who are you? I'm Margaret Sutton, executor of Helen Wallace's estate. And I've heard quite enough of this conversation. She turned to Mr. Patterson. Did you record all of that? He held up his phone. Every word. Margaret looked at my parents and Brandon. Helen anticipated exactly this scenario. Her will includes a specific clause. If any family member harasses or attempts to manipulate Delilah regarding the inheritance, they are formally banned from contesting the will and could face legal consequences for harassment. She pulled a document from her purse. This is a cease and desist letter. If any of you contact Delilah again about the inheritance or attempt to pressure her in any way, we will pursue legal action. Furthermore, Mr. Patterson has already been in contact with the police regarding the unauthorized bank transfers. With Delilah's inheritance, she can now afford an excellent attorney to pursue criminal charges if she chooses. My father's face went pale. My mother looked like she might faint. Brandon's aggressive posture deflated. Courtney grabbed his arm and whispered urgently, Let's go. This is over. She started pulling Brandon toward their truck. He resisted for a moment, then let himself be led away. As they drove off, Courtney's angry voice could be heard even through the closed windows. My parents stood there, looking lost and small. My father opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again. My mother's tears were flowing freely now, but they looked different than before. Not manipulative tears, but tears of someone realizing they'd made a terrible mistake. Delilah, she whispered. Please. I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me, the part that had loved them my whole life, wanted to soften, wanted to say it was okay, that we could fix this. But I thought about Helen's letter. Choose people who choose you. Be free. Goodbye, Mom, I said quietly. Goodbye, Dad. I got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing in the parking lot, getting smaller and smaller, until they disappeared completely. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Margaret helped me hire an attorney, a sharp woman named Jessica Torres who specialized in estate law and family disputes. Jessica sent formal cease and desist letters to my parents and Brandon. The letters were clear. Any further contact regarding the inheritance would result in legal action. Any attempts to contest the will would be met with aggressive defense. And the criminal investigation into the unauthorized bank transfers was ongoing. My parents tried to contact me twice more after that day in the parking lot. Both times, Jessica responded on my behalf with firm legal warnings. After that, the calls stopped. The detective handling the bank fraud case contacted me with news. My parents had agreed to return the $3,600 in full to avoid criminal prosecution. A cashier's check arrived at my apartment 2 weeks later. No note attached. Just the money, returned because they had no other choice. Brandon and Courtney went silent completely. Through Tracy's cousin Amanda, I heard that their marriage was falling apart. Courtney had apparently been counting on a share of Helen's inheritance to pay off their credit card debt. When that didn't happen, she blamed Brandon for ruining their financial future. They were fighting constantly. Amanda said Courtney had been overheard at the office saying she never would have married Brandon if she'd known his family had no money. I felt nothing when I heard that news. Not satisfaction. Not sympathy. Just emptiness. Where my family used to be. But alongside that emptiness, something new was growing. Freedom. Space to breathe. Permission to focus on myself for the first time in years. I met with a financial advisor to discuss the inheritance. The 3 rental properties were indeed generating $6,000 monthly. After taxes and the property management fees, I'd net about $5,500 per month in passive income. That was more than my teaching salary. The advisor suggested I keep 2 of the properties as long-term investments and consider selling the third property along with Helen's house. That would give me about $700,000 in liquid assets while maintaining steady rental income. I thought about it for a week, then decided that's exactly what I'd do. I didn't need Helen's house. I wanted to stay in Portland, close to my job and my friends. But having that money in the bank meant security, freedom from financial stress, and the ability to build the life I'd always wanted but couldn't afford. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans. $32,000, gone in a single payment. I'd been chipping away at those loans for 10 years, watching the interest accumulate faster than I could pay them down. Seeing that balance drop to zero felt like taking off a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. Then I went apartment hunting. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a newer building on the west side of Portland. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the mountains. A real kitchen with granite counters and stainless steel appliances. A balcony where I could drink coffee in the morning. 2 bathrooms, which felt impossibly luxurious after years in my tiny 1-bedroom. The building had a gym, a rooftop terrace, and secure parking. It cost $450,000, which would have been impossible before. Now, I paid cash. I furnished it slowly and carefully, choosing each piece with intention. A comfortable couch in soft gray fabric, a real dining table instead of eating on the couch, bookshelves for my teaching materials and novels, artwork that I actually liked, not just whatever was cheapest at the discount store. I bought a good mattress, the kind that makes you excited to go to bed at night. I hung curtains that blocked out the light and bought soft towels that felt like clouds. Every morning, I woke up in my beautiful space and felt gratitude wash over me. This was mine. I'd earned it. Not through birthright or luck, but because someone had seen my worth and chosen to invest in it. I started therapy with a counselor named Dr. Sarah Chen. She specialized in family trauma and helped me understand the dynamics I'd been living in. She used terms like narcissistic family system and scapegoat child, and suddenly everything made sense. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't been the problem. I'd been trapped in a dysfunctional system that required me to give endlessly while receiving nothing in return. Dr. Chen helped me understand that healing meant accepting that my family might never change, might never apologize, might never acknowledge what they'd done. And that was okay. I didn't need their validation anymore. Helen had given me something more valuable than money. She'd given me permission to choose myself. As the months passed, my life transformed in ways I'd never imagined. Margaret became a regular presence in my life. She invited me to Sunday dinners at her house in Eugene. I started driving down once or twice a month. She told me stories about Helen, showed me old photographs, helped me understand where I came from. Through Margaret, I learned that Helen had been brilliant and funny and fierce. She'd traveled alone through Europe in her 50s. She'd learned to play piano at 60. She'd volunteered at a women's shelter for 20 years. She'd lived on her own terms and never apologized for it. Margaret also introduced me to other family members I'd never known. Cousins on my mother's side, who lived in Salem. They were shocked to learn I existed because my parents had isolated them years ago, always making excuses about why we couldn't attend family gatherings. One cousin, Jennifer, told me she'd tried to connect with me on social media years ago, but my mother had told her I was going through a difficult time and needed space. Jennifer had respected that and backed off. Now she was furious to learn my mother had lied. I attended a cousin's wedding that spring. I met aunts and uncles and second cousins. I learned about the family history my parents had hidden from me. I discovered that my mother's side of the family was warm and welcoming, and nothing like the cold isolation my parents had created. These relatives asked about my teaching, my students, my life. They listened when I talked. They hugged me when we said goodbye and meant it. For the first time, I understood what healthy family relationships looked like. Tracy remained my anchor through all of it. She was there for the hard days when grief hit unexpectedly. She celebrated with me, when I closed on my condo. She helped me paint my bedroom a soft blue color that made me feel calm. She listened when I needed to process everything that had happened. She never once said "I told you so," even though she'd warned me for years that my family was taking advantage of me. At school, I threw myself into teaching with renewed energy. I wasn't constantly stressed about money anymore. I wasn't spending every evening grading papers while worrying about whether I could afford my bills. I took my students on field trips. I bought supplies for my classroom with my own money, because I could afford to now. I started an after-school reading club for struggling readers. Teaching had always been meaningful to me, but now I could focus on the joy of it without the constant undercurrent of financial anxiety. That December, as Christmas approached again, I felt different. Last year, I'd spent Christmas alone, crying on my couch with takeout food. This year, I planned carefully. I invited Margaret, Tracy, and her family, 3 of my cousins and their kids, and several teacher friends. I bought a real Christmas tree, 7 feet tall, and decorated it with white lights and red ornaments. I cooked a turkey, using a recipe Margaret gave me. I made mashed potatoes and green bean casserole and rolls from scratch. I set my new dining table with real dishes and cloth napkins. On Christmas afternoon, my condo filled with people. Children ran through the rooms laughing. Adults talked and joked in the kitchen while I basted the turkey. Someone put on Christmas music. Margaret sat on my couch with a glass of wine, telling a story that had everyone laughing. Tracy helped me carry dishes to the table. My cousin, Jennifer's daughter, who was 7, asked if she could help me set out the desserts. I showed her where everything went, and she arranged the pies with serious concentration. We gathered around the table, somehow all fitting, even though it was crowded. Before we ate, Margaret raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, "to Delilah, who opened her home and her heart to all of us. To Helen, whose wisdom and generosity made this possible. And to chosen family, which is sometimes stronger than blood." Everyone raised their glasses. "To chosen family," they echoed. I looked around the table at these people who'd chosen to be here, who wanted to celebrate with me, who saw me as someone worth knowing and loving. My eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. After dinner, we opened presents. I'd bought thoughtful gifts for everyone. Books for the kids, nice wine for the adults. A vintage brooch for Margaret that reminded me of one Helen wore in an old photograph. People had brought gifts for me too. A cozy blanket from Tracy. A framed photo from Margaret showing Helen as a young woman, standing proud and strong. A homemade card from Jennifer's daughter with a drawing of me that said "Best Teacher Ever." Later that evening, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up, I found myself standing by my Christmas tree. The lights twinkled softly in the darkening room. I thought about last Christmas, about sitting alone in my old apartment, feeling abandoned and worthless. I thought about the phone call that had shattered my world. "Don't come for Christmas." At the time, those words had felt like the worst thing that could happen. Like my family was ending, like I was losing everything. But now, I understood. That phone call wasn't an ending. It was permission. Permission to stop sacrificing myself for people who didn't value me. Permission to walk away from dysfunction and build something healthier. Permission to find out who I really was when I wasn't constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. My parents and Brandon had tried to reach out a few times over the year. Small attempts, tentative text messages. "How are you doing? We should talk sometime. Maybe we can work things out." I never responded. Jessica, my attorney, had advised me to maintain no contact, and I agreed. But beyond the legal reasons, I simply didn't want to let them back in. They'd shown me exactly who they were. I believed them. Some people might think that's cold or unforgiving. But I'd learned through therapy that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I could forgive them for being flawed, damaged people who didn't know how to love in healthy ways. But I didn't have to give them another chance to hurt me. Forgiveness meant releasing my anger so it didn't poison me. It didn't mean opening the door to more abuse. I thought about Helen often. I wished I could have known her, sat with her, thanked her in person. But in a way, she was still teaching me. Through her example, I learned that a woman could be independent and successful and happy without conforming to what society or family expected. Through her final gift, she taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is empowering someone to save themselves. I opened the small wooden box on my mantel. Inside was the silver bracelet Margaret had given me at Christmas, the one that had belonged to Helen. It was simple. Just a slim band of silver with words engraved on the inside. Choose yourself. I slipped it onto my wrist. I wore it every day now. A reminder of everything I'd learned. The lessons from this year had been painful but necessary. I learned that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes family is the people who choose you, who see your worth, who celebrate your successes, instead of envying them. I learned that saying no doesn't make you selfish. Protecting yourself doesn't make you cruel. Walking away from toxicity doesn't make you a quitter. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself when everyone else wants you to choose them. I learned that you can't earn love from people who don't know how to give it. You can sacrifice everything, give until you have nothing left, and it will never be enough. Because the problem isn't you. The problem is them. I learned that when someone shows you who they are, believe them. When they tell you not to come for Christmas, when they shut the door in your face, when they steal from you and lie about you, they're showing you the truth. Honor that truth by protecting yourself. Most importantly, I learned that your worth isn't determined by whether your family values you. Your worth is inherent, built into who you are at your core. Some people will see it, and some won't. That's okay. You don't need everyone to see your value. You just need to see it yourself and surround yourself with people who recognize it too. As I stood by my Christmas tree in my beautiful home, financially secure for the first time in my adult life, surrounded by the evidence of genuine love and connection, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Deep, bone-level peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't waiting for my parents to change or apologize. I wasn't hoping Brandon would tell the truth. I'd released all of that. I thought about the call I'd receive next Christmas. Not from my parents, but from Margaret, inviting me to dinner. From Tracy, coordinating when to exchange gifts. From my cousins, asking what I wanted them to bring to my gathering. From my students' parents, thanking me for another wonderful semester. These were the calls that mattered now. These were the people who'd earned a place in my life. The phone on my counter lit up with a notification. A text from Margaret. Thank you for today. Helen would be so proud of the woman you've become. See you soon. Love always. I smiled and texted back a heart emoji. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my couch, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. My life wasn't perfect. I still had hard days. Sometimes I felt sad about what could have been if my family had been different. Sometimes I mourned the parents I'd needed, but never had. But those moments were becoming fewer and further between. They were being replaced by contentment, by gratitude, by the quiet joy of a life built on my own terms. I thought about other people out there who might be in the situation I'd been in a year ago. People who were sacrificing themselves for family members who didn't appreciate them. People who were being manipulated and used and made to feel like they were never enough. People who were afraid to walk away because family is supposed to be forever. If I could say anything to them, it would be this. You are worthy of love and respect. You don't have to earn your place at the table. If your family makes you feel like you do, if they withdraw their love as punishment or use you as a resource, you have permission to walk away. It's not giving up. It's choosing life. You deserve people who celebrate your successes, who believe in you, who are there in hard times without keeping score. You deserve relationships where love flows both directions, where you're valued for who you are and not what you can provide. And if your blood family can't give you that, you have permission to build your own family from people who can. Chosen family is real family. Sometimes it's the truest family of all. The bracelet on my wrist caught the light from the Christmas tree. Choose yourself. 2 simple words that had changed everything. I'd chosen myself, and in doing so, I'd found freedom. I'd found peace. I'd found out who I really was, when I wasn't busy trying to be what everyone else needed. And that person was someone I actually liked, someone I was proud to be. As I sat there in the peaceful quiet of my home, I realized something profound. When my mother said, "Don't come for Christmas," she thought she was punishing me. She thought she was taking something away, but actually, she was giving me the greatest gift I'd ever received. She was giving me permission to leave, permission to stop trying, permission to finally put myself first. She'd meant to hurt me, but she'd actually set me free. And now, a year later, I could honestly say thank you. Thank you for showing me the truth. Thank you for making the break clean and clear. Thank you for forcing me to find out who I was without you. Because the person I found was stronger, happier, and more at peace than I ever was when I was trying to earn your love. I'd built a life that was truly mine. And nobody, not even the people who raised me, could take that away. So here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever been in a situation where family or people you loved made you feel like you had to constantly prove your worth? Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to walk away from toxic relationships even when it felt impossible? What helped you find the courage to choose yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes all the difference. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Sharing these stories helps them reach people who might need to hear them. And please share this with anyone in your life who might need the reminder that they deserve better, that their worth isn't determined by how their family treats them, and that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it brought you some comfort, some validation, or maybe just the reminder that happy endings are possible, even after the deepest betrayals. Wishing you all the courage to choose yourself, the wisdom to recognize your worth, and the peace that comes from building a life that truly reflects who you are. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you deserve people who choose you back.